The Shiver on Route 13, the empty road. The night was a bruise on the world, swollen and heavy, pressing down on the endless stretch of Route 13. This was no ordinary road. It carved through the French countryside like a scar, flanked by trees and fields that whispered secrets to the wind. The locals in the nearby villages avoided it after dusk, their warnings cloaked in hushed tones and nervous glances. "Stay off Route 13, they'd say, or she'll find you." No one ever clarified who she was, but the weight of the words was enough to keep most away. Antoine Leroux, however, was not one to heed superstition. A journalist by trade, he thrived on unraveling mysteries, picking apart folklore like a vulture, tearing at carrion. At 32, he was restless, chasing stories that could ignite his faltering career. The tale of the phantom hitchhiker had reached him through a colleague in Paris. A throwaway anecdote about a woman who appeared on Route 13, thumb outstretched, only to vanish from the backseat of cars before they reached their destination. It was a tired trope. Antoine thought a ghost story recycled across cultures, from American highways to English moors. But the locals' fear was real, and that intrigued him. There was something here, something raw and unspoken, and he intended to dig it out. He rented a battered Peugeot and set out just before midnight, the hour when the stories were thickest. The air was sharp with autumn's bite, and the sky was a starless void, the moon smothered by clouds. His dashboard clock blinked 11:47 p.m. as he turned onto Route 13, the road unfurling before him like a ribbon of ink. His phone, propped on the passenger seat, recorded his narration for the article he planned to write. A night on Route 13, debunking the phantom. His voice was steady, laced with a skeptic's confidence. "Let's see if this ghost shows up," he muttered, half to himself, half to the recorder. The first hour passed in silence, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves skittering across the asphalt. The road was desolate, not a single car in sight. Antoine's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching only his own reflection. Tired eyes, stubbled jaw, a man chasing shadows. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "Nothing but stories," he said, his voice echoing in the empty car. Then, at 12:53 a.m., he saw her. She stood by the roadside, illuminated by the weak glow of his headlights. A woman, young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark hair spilling over her shoulders. She wore a pale dress, almost luminous against the night, and her thumb was raised in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. Antoine's breath caught, not from fear, but from surprise. He hadn't expected anyone out here, ghost or not. He slowed the car, his journalist's instincts overriding caution. If this was the phantom, he'd have one hell of a story. If she was real, well, he couldn't leave a woman stranded in the middle of nowhere. He pulled over, tires crunching on gravel. The woman didn't move until the car stopped, and then she approached with a slow, deliberate grace. Her face was striking pale, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to swallow the light. She leaned down to the passenger window, and Antoine rolled it down. "Bonsoir," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying a faint accent he couldn't place. "Can you take me to St. Lys?" Antoine hesitated. St. Lys was a small village, maybe 20 kilometers away. He glanced at the empty road behind her, then back at her face. Her expression was calm, expectant, but there was something unsettling in her stillness, like a painting that watched you back. "Sure," he said, forcing a smile. Hopping, she slid into the passenger seat without a word, her movements fluid, almost too smooth. The air grew colder as she settled in, a chill that seeped into Antoine's bones despite the heater's hum. He glanced at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. No bag, no coat, nothing but the dress clinging to her frame. Odd, he thought, but he pushed the thought aside. People did strange things. He'd seen stranger. "I'm Antoine," he said, pulling back onto the road. "What's your name?" "Clara," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Out here alone," he pressed, keeping his tone light. "It's not exactly safe." She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to catch the edge of her smile. It was a strange smile, not warm but not cruel, either, more like the curve of a blade. "I'm not alone," she said. "Not really." Antoine's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The words were innocuous, but they landed like a stone in his gut. He laughed, more to break the tension than because he found it funny. "Right. Well, let's get you to St. Lys." The road stretched on, the silence between them growing heavier with each kilometer. Antoine tried to fill it, asking questions about where she was from, why she was out so late. But Clara's answers were vague, her voice a soft murmur that seemed to blend with the hum of the engine. "I travel," she said at one point. "I always have." When he asked what she meant, she only smiled that same unsettling smile. At 1:17 a.m., the dashboard clock flickered, just once, but enough to make Antoine blink. He glanced at the rear view mirror, half expecting to see her gone, but she was still there, her silhouette steady in the passenger seat. The chill hadn't left though, and now his breath fogged faintly in the air. He cranked the heater higher, but it made no difference. "You're writing about me, aren't you?" Clara said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Antoine's heart stuttered. He hadn't mentioned the article, hadn't even hinted at it. "What?" he said, his voice sharper than he intended. "Your recorder," she said, nodding toward the phone on the dashboard. "You're chasing stories. Mine, maybe." He forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "You're perceptive." "Yeah, I'm a journalist. Heard some tales about this road. Thought I'd check them out." Her eyes met his for the first time, and the weight of her gaze was like a physical thing, pressing against his chest. "Be careful what you chase," she said. "Some stories don't want to be told." Before he could respond, the car lurched. The engine sputtered, and the headlights dimmed, casting the road into near darkness. Antoine cursed, slamming his foot on the gas, but the car slowed to a crawl, then stopped entirely. The dashboard went black, the recorder's red light blinking out. He turned the key, but the engine was dead, silent as a grave. "Damn it," he muttered, glancing at Clara. She hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. She sat there, serene, her hands still folded, her eyes fixed on the road. "Something's wrong with the car," he said, more to fill the silence than because he thought she cared. He popped the hood and stepped out, the cold biting at his skin the moment he left the car. The night was unnaturally still, no wind, no insects, just a suffocating quiet. He checked the engine, but everything looked fine. No leaks, no loose wires, nothing to explain the sudden failure. When he slid back into the driver's seat, Clara was gone. The passenger door was still closed, the seatbelt untouched. The air was colder than ever, and a faint scent lingered, something metallic, like blood, mixed with something sweeter, like rotting flowers. Antoine's heart pounded as he scanned the road, the fields, the darkness beyond. Nothing, no sign of her. His phone was still on the dashboard, but when he checked it, the recording was blank. 2 hours of audio, gone. He sat there for a long time, the weight of the night pressing down on him. Eventually, the car started again, as inexplicably as it had stopped. He drove to St. Lee's, his hands shaking, his mind racing. The village was asleep, its streets empty, but he found a bar still open and stumbled inside, desperate for light, for people, for anything to shake the chill that clung to him. The bartender, an older man with a face like weathered leather, listened as Antoine recounted the night, leaving out the parts that sounded too insane. When he mentioned Route 13, the man's expression darkened. "You saw her, didn't you?" he said, pouring Antoine a drink without being asked. "The woman," Antoine nodded, his throat tight. "Clara." She said her name was Clara. The bartender's hand froze mid-pour. "Clara's not her name," he said quietly. "She doesn't have one. Not anymore." The weight of names. Antoine didn't sleep that night. He checked into a small inn in St. Lis, the kind of place where the walls creaked and the furniture smelled of dust and time. He sat on the edge of the bed, his notebook open, scribbling everything he could remember about Clara, her face, her voice, the way the air seemed to bend around her. The bartender's words echoed in his mind. "She doesn't have one. Not anymore." The next morning, he drove back to Paris, but the story wouldn't let him go. He scoured archives, old newspapers, anything that might explain what he'd seen. The phantom hitchhiker was a known legend, but the details were maddeningly vague. Always a woman, always young, always vanishing. Some stories claimed she was a bride killed on her wedding night, others a wanderer cursed to roam the roads. None mentioned Route 13 specifically, and none gave a name. He called the bartender, whose name was Marcel, and pressed for more. Marcel was reluctant, his voice low over the phone. "She's been there longer than anyone remembers," he said. "My grandfather saw her back in the 50s. Same road, same story. She gets in, she talks, she's gone. And you feel wrong after." Like something stuck to you. Stuck to me? Antoine asked, his voice sharper than he meant. Marcel hesitated. You'll see. Just don't go back to that road. Antoine ignored the warning. He couldn't let it go, not when the story was so close. He returned to Route 13 the next night, the same Peugeot rattling under him, the same recorder blinking. On the dashboard, this time, he was prepared extra batteries, a flashlight, a thermos of coffee to keep him sharp. He drove slowly, scanning the roadside, but the night was empty. No Clara, no hitchhikers, no anything, just the road and the silence. At 1:17 a.m., the clock flickered again. The air grew cold, and that same metallic floral scent filled the car. Antoine's heart raced, but he kept driving, his eyes locked on the road. Clara, he said aloud, his voice trembling. If you're here, show yourself. Nothing happened. The road stretched on, unchanging. But when he glanced at the rearview mirror, he saw it a shadow in the back seat, vague and shapeless, like smoke given form. He slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a stop. The shadow was gone when he turned, but the cold was unbearable now, his breath clouding the air. The recorder was still running, but when he played it back later, all he heard was static, threaded with a faint, distorted whisper. Be careful what you chase. He didn't see her that night, or the next, but the feeling never left. It was as if she'd marked him, her presence lingering like a stain. He started noticing things. His reflection in mirrors seemed off, his shadow too long. At night, he'd wake to the sound of footsteps in his apartment, only to find no one there. The scent of blood and flowers followed him, faint but persistent, clinging to his clothes. His skin, the unseen passenger. Weeks turned into months, and Antoine's obsession grew. He stopped writing for his paper, his editor calling him erratic. Unhinged, he didn't care. Route 13 was all that mattered. He drove it every night, chasing the ghost he couldn't shake. Sometimes he saw her, always at 1:17 a.m., always the same pale dress, dark eyes, that smile like a blade. She never stayed long, vanishing before he could reach Saint-Lys. But each encounter left him more hollow, more desperate. He started talking to her, even when she wasn't there. What do you want? He'd whisper into the empty car. Why me? The recorder caught nothing but his own voice, but he kept it running, hoping for answers. One night, he found a lead. An old woman in a village near Route 13. Madame de claimed to know the truth. Antoine found her in a crumbling cottage, surrounded by cats and yellowed photographs. She was ancient, her eyes milky with cataracts, but her voice was sharp. She's not a ghost, Madame Duval said, her hands trembling as she clutched a rosary. Not like you think. She's something else, something older. She was here, before the road, before the villages. She takes what she needs, takes what Antoine asked, his notebook forgotten in his lap. Pieces, the old woman said, of you, your time, your warmth, your name. She rides with you, and when she leaves, you're less than you were. Antoine's skin crawled. How do I stop her? Madame Duval's eyes narrowed. You don't. You shouldn't have looked at her. You shouldn't have let her in. He left the cottage shaken, but the warning only fueled him. That night, he drove to Route 13 with a new plan. He'd confront her, demand answers, force her to leave him alone. He brought a knife, not sure what he intended to do with it, but its weight in his pocket was a comfort dot. At 1:17 a.m. she was there, thumb raised, dress glowing in the headlights. He stopped, his heart pounding, and she slid into the passenger seat. The cold came with her, sharper than ever, and the scent of blood and flowers was overwhelming. Clara, he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. What do you... Ooh. She turned to him, her smile wider now, almost predatory. You know my name isn't Clara, she said. You know what I am. Tell me, he demanded, his hand gripping the knife in his pocket. She leaned closer, her breath cold against his cheek. I'm the road, she whispered. I'm the night. I'm the thing you invited in. The car died again, the lights flickering out. In the darkness, her eyes glowed, not with light but with something deeper, something that pulled at him, unraveling him. He lunged with the knife, but his arm froze mid-swing, his body no longer his own. Her laughter was soft, like the rustle of dead leaves, and then she was gone. When the car started again, Antoine was alone, but he wasn't the same. His reflection in the rearview mirror was wrong, his eyes too dark, his skin too pale. The knife was gone, and so was a piece of him. Though he couldn't say what. The endless drive. Antoine stopped going to Route 13, but it didn't matter. She was with him now, in every shadow, every mirror, every quiet moment. He moved to the apartment, then a new city, but the footsteps followed, the scent lingered, and his reflection grew stranger with each passing day. He stopped writing, stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The world felt thin, like a veil stretched too tight, and behind it, he could feel her watching. One night, unable to bear it any longer, he drove back to Route 13. It was 1:17 a.m. when he saw her, standing by the roadside, thumb raised. He didn't stop this time. He floored the gas, the car screaming down the road, but she was in the back seat anyway. Her smile reflected in the mirror. "You can't outrun me," she said. Her voice inside his skull now, not his ears. "You invited me in," he screamed, the car swerving, but the road seemed to stretch forever. The trees closing in, the night swallowing him whole. When the police found the Peugeot the next morning, it was empty, the engine still running, the recorder blinking on, the dashboard, the audio was blank, except for a single distorted whisper. "Be careful what you chase. Route 13 is quiet now," the locals say. The hitchhiker hasn't been seen in years, but sometimes, on moonless nights, a car will pass through St. Lee's with an extra shadow in the back seat, and the driver's eyes will be too dark, their smile too sharp. And if you listen closely, you might hear the road itself whisper, in a voice like blood and flowers, "I'm still here."